अच्छा जी, चलो ठीक है। अच्छा जी, welcome all. Have we been able to connect everybody? Shanaz, can we hear you? Shanaz Wazir Ali, are you there? जी जरा चेक कर लें if Shanaz Wazir Ali can be heard. Mansoor साहब,
can you hear me?
जी, I can hear you. I can hear you well.
Okay. All right.
Okay जी, lovely जी, lovely. Okay folks, welcome to the PID Roundtable on Education. We thought we'd take the initiative and try and figure out education. This is a subject that is of deep concern to the whole of Pakistan, including every political party and especially our current our current Prime Minister, who has quite vocally advocated education for all for the last 20 years and is now trying to do something about it. I hope the correct things. But we are trying basically to figure out what education is, what is wrong with us, and we have tried to assemble a very good team and see how we can work this out, the education paradigm. So a bit of housekeeping first. Please mute your mics, let the speakers speak, and try and be as short as possible. We've got a very good roundtable. We've got almost all the experts that I can think of. If we missed out anybody, it's my fault. I apologize for it, but let's try and let everybody have a chance to speak. So we've got 5 roundtables, as you can see on this chart, right? But first, let's go back. Mansoor Sahib, let's go back. I want you to make sure that you remember this cartoon. We use this before every webinar, not every, but a few, because I want you to realize what this cartoon is saying. It was through some newspaper, I forget now which one, that the IMF, big fat daddy, and I used to be in the IMF, so I do my own confession, is holding the strings, and Pakistan is running with loans dangling in front over a very rough terrain. So please remember that. Mansoor Sahib, go forward. Acha ji, our roundtable will go for 5 days. The education paradigm in Pakistan is what we are talking about today. Tomorrow we'll talk about the role of government. Day after tomorrow, public-private partnerships. Then we'll talk about technology because technology is really taking off. And then we'll talk about the unified curriculum. Our partners are, we've got the Balochistan Institute of Development with us, and we've got Shafqat Mahmood, and the ministry has kindly consented to be also our partners. So I think we are very, very glad. We want to partner with everybody. So we are happy to have a Balochistan partner as well as the ministry, which is absolutely wonderful. Partnership means nothing, but it means collaboration. And that's what we want to do. We want to collaborate with people, and it's very important. Go ahead, Ji. Next slide. Next slide. Now here you can see we've got a number of people. We've got everybody. When we've got everybody with us. I won't read all the names because there are too many to read. We have got a few people who are saying to lead the discussion. They volunteered. It doesn't mean anything. Anybody can lead. Anybody can speak. So it doesn't mean. I would ask all the speakers to be short and crisp because we really want to get everybody in. Next slide, Ji. Shafqat couldn't make it, the minister couldn't make it, so the minister sent a message. Chalaiye ji.
Pakistan Institute of Development Economics is holding a week-long discussion on education. And I think this is a very important gathering because nothing is more important than education. We keep saying that, but we seldom follow it up. And now the time has come because this government is taking some special initiatives on education. We are trying to reduce the disparity between a class-based education through the introduction of a single national curriculum, which is an important initiative to reduce disparities and to somehow try and level the playing field for everybody. But then there are a large number of other issues. An outstanding response of our government has been on online education and tele-school during the times of COVID. There are very few countries who reacted to COVID and managed education in this period as well as this government has done. But there is more to be done. and more to be discussed. Similarly, higher education, issues of quality are very, very important. We keep making universities, but the quality is not what it should be. So we need to look at that. We need to look at the role of education, role of government in education as a whole, which is a very important role. But how do we take it forward? And particularly in times of COVID, what we have to see is how can we use technology in the future to make create further progresses in education. How can we make sure that distance learning becomes a part of our learning methodology? So all of these are different issues and they require a lot of discussion. So I congratulate Dr. Dimul Haq and PIDE for holding a week-long discussion on different issues related to education. I'll be closely following it, and I hope to participate at least in one of the sessions on Sunday.
Well, thank you very much. The minister said he couldn't make it, and he sent us this message. So, ladies and gentlemen, it will be wonderful to have a very good dialogue on this. I also want you to see this because I use it again in many seminars. We must understand that we've been in a fund program for a long time, and this is something that we really must understand. Why are we in a fund program continuously? It shows a deep policy problem. Next slide. Next slide. Acha ji, this chart again is worth seeing because we use it again every time. Our long-term growth is declining, and perhaps education is the answer. I'm not saying it is, but it could be the answer. Next slide. Our investment rate also is the lowest in the world. And this too could be related, but it's something, these are things that we want you to bear in mind. Next slide. We have seen, we've done a number of webinars, we do them regularly, and we have seen these are the things that we've learned over a few years, and I think you'll see that this is probably true in education too. One of the problems that everybody in every sector, in every area, in every industry, agriculture, industry, services, everywhere points out that policy inconsistency and poor policy development are a big problem. Our tax policy is a big problem. We've got huge problems in transactions costs, marketing, energy, and governance is a big problem. We don't have good cities. So there's a number of issues that we've discovered and we should keep in front of us. Next slide. Okay, this cartoon is worth seeing too. This is from 1950. In 1950, they had talked about our aid dependence through this cartoon. This is from Pakistan Times in 1950. So ladies and gentlemen, please remember, we have been aid dependent for more than 70 years. And this is worth bearing in mind. Next slide, please. It is not that we are short of policies. We are totally, we have had a number of policies. This is the number of education policies I've been able to find, and there might have been more. So we have a number of education policies that we are not short of, but we keep making education policies. So the question is, maybe these policies are not good, or maybe these policies are very good, or maybe we have been able to deliver. That I leave to you, but I thought it was worth putting that in front of you. Next slide. All the policies have had the same goals: character building, learning, meeting learning needs, nationhood, right to education, quality of education. These are standard slides that I picked up from people who introduced the harmonization of curriculum. So this is an old goal that we've always had for a long time. Next slide. One thing that is also very clear from the economic points of view, our returns to education, whether primary or higher or whatever, are the lowest in the world. Oh, well, very low compared to others. Primary education is much lower, and some studies have even been found to be negative. Female returns to female education are somewhat better than male education, but there are low returns everywhere. So the question is it a labor market problem or is it an education design problem? And I leave that to you to answer. And are we prescribing the right thing or the wrong thing? So this is the question that I leave to you. Next slide, G. So the question that I'll pose to you, which I posed before as well, is education, from my point of view as an economist, education without opportunity is useless. Might as well not educate kids. It may please us the rich people to give them education, but honestly, if it doesn't help them, it's no use giving them education. So I think that's a big important point. Do we have education for the poor, or do we have education only to satisfy ourselves? So we have to be very careful of that. Education is an investment good. It is something that people use for social mobility, not for nationalism and good citizenship. There is a cost, both opportunity and financial. And my favorite phrase is, if they are educated, they deserve to belong to my club. Merit is important. Without merit, why should people get educated? I remember a driver telling me, you want educated drivers, and I don't want to educate my kid to give you an educated driver. Next slide. Now we got a few.
Now, I don't mean to say that being wrong is the same thing as being creative. What we do know is, if you're not prepared to be wrong, you will never come up with anything original. If you're not prepared to be wrong. And by the time they get to be adults, most kids have lost that capacity. They have become frightened of being wrong. And we run our companies this, by the way. We stigmatize mistakes. And we're now running national education systems where mistakes are the worst thing you can make. And the result is that we are educating people out of their creative capacities. Picasso once said this. He said that all children are born artists. The problem is to remain an artist as we grow up. I believe this passionately, that we don't grow into creativity, we grow out of it. Or rather, we get educated out of it.
When I was their age, I did not love high school. Not because I struggled academically or socially. I was fine. I didn't love high school because at the time, I found it to be pointless. I didn't get it. I didn't understand the value of it. And every time I'd sit down to read another chapter of Wuthering Heights, I would think, why? Dear God, why?
There is wonderful work happening in this country. But I have to say, it's happening in spite of the dominant culture of education, not because of it. It's like people are sailing into a headwind all the time. And the reason I think is this, that many of the current policies are based on mechanistic conceptions of education. It's like education is an industrial process that can be improved just by having better.
Achaji, now these are the questions. We've been trying to focus on education as citizenship, as ideology for the last 70 years. People want opportunity into mobility. Students pay for education, whether it's free or not. They pay through their hard work and through their opportunity cost, which is the time they devote to it. So it is a big cost to them. They drop out, they vote with their feet. They don't think that this education is what they need. We call them irrational, and we are measuring the dropout rate. But I think it's very rational behavior on their part. At least economists think that. Next slide. So the question is, as Ken Robinson said, can we get kids to learn through exploration and learning, or should we tell them what to learn? Must we have structured education where everybody turns up 5 days in a week? I remember in Norway, during the war or after the war, they had 2 days a week education, and they did fine. Should we have more flexibility in learning? Should we focus on teachers, teacher training projects? I've heard of teacher training projects since I was in school, and I've heard of teachers since I was in school. Question is, are we measuring the right thing? Are we measuring the right thing as we measure in all these ratings, or should we measure something else? So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I will open up the discussion to our experts. After this, I don't have anything to say, or PIDE has nothing to say. We'll address the experts. So we'll ask Shanaz Wazir Ali to start, lead the discussion, and then we'll move on to Mrs. Neelam Hussain, and after that, we'll open up to roundtable. Shanaz, please, the floor is yours.
Jay, thank you very much, Nadeem. An education sector discussion is really a very, very complex arrangement of ideas, concepts, aspirations, and ground realities. To reform education, one of the biggest obstacles, of course, has always been that we don't recognize the multiplicity of realities on the ground. When we attempt to reform education or try to redesign it, refocus it, and maybe even redefine it like you have done. What is the purpose of it? Why should we have education in the way that we have it? Should there be this sort of rigidity about classrooms and timetables and academic years, etc.? The fact is that it's all very good to talk about a lot of abstractions, but in Pakistan, we need to be very closely connected with what is the status of education today. What is the ground reality? The ground reality is extremely disturbing, as we know. And the ground reality tells us that the public sector system, which does not come up to expectation on any of the indicators, I won't go into that in detail, the public sector education is actually arranged according to what might be a convenient management model. It is not an education design. So having X number of teachers and X number of schools 3 kilometers away from a village, X number of hours in school, defined and prescribed textbooks, etc., with no flexibility. This is really a management model. And this is the difficulty I think that one has with it and has had for decades. Can there be an arrangement where you localize education and you actually then make that compromise and say that we are not going to overburden the education content with national ideology, with heavy religious content, with heavy ideological indoctrination, but we are really going down to what a child needs to learn and how best he or she learns it, and allow those decisions actually to be much closer to the school and localize it. I'll just stop there. I think there are many, many issues, but to my mind, it's not so much a financing issue. It's a strategic approach to this entire experience of education. And is there a way in Pakistan that we can move away from a one prescriptive model to allow different types of experiences to take place? I know this violates the concept of, equity for all, equality for all. And I definitely want to underscore the fact that when we do talk about equity and equal opportunity for all, we are not necessarily talking about uniformity. So opportunity should be provided, but I don't think you can measure equality and equity through opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Shanaz. I'll call Kurutulan Bakhtiyari from the Balochistan Institute, our partner. Kurutulan, can you please take the floor next?
Hello.
Ji.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
सबको अस्सलाम वालेकुम. बहुत शुक्रिया पाइड इस मौके का. बहुत इम्पोर्टेंट टॉपिक है और बहुत अहम भी है. और मैं अपने आप को हरगिज किसी किस्म का एक्सपर्ट नहीं देखती हूँ, बल्कि मुसलसल एक ऐसे अमल में अपने आप को पाती हूँ कि री एजुकेट हो रही हूँ और मुसलसल एक हेलो.
Go ahead.
जी.
We can hear you.
जी, एक ऐसे सिलसिले में हूँ कि जिसने मुझे ये समझा दिया है कि एजुकेशन जो है वो स्टैटिक नहीं है, वन टाइम नहीं है, इवॉल्विंग है, डायनामिक है. और एक सवाल उठता है बार बार, क्या एजुकेशन मीन्स है या एंड है या दोनों हैं? ये हमें इसको बहुत ही ज़्यादा रिसर्च बेस्ड एनालिसिस की करनी चाहिए कि हमारा जो नेशनल माइंडसेट है वो हम एजुकेशन को कोई एक मैजिक वैन की तरह से देखते हैं कि सब चीज़ का हल निकल आएगा इससे, या एजुकेशन बजाते खुद एक रास्ता है. ये हमें एजुकेशनल प्रोसेसेस को हमें डिफाइन करना ज़रूरी पड़ेगा. ये मुझे समझ में आया. कैसे समझ में आया? मेरे सब ये पीएचडी और सब कुछ करने के बाद मैं जब बलूचिस्तान गई तो मैं जब वहाँ पे लड़कियों के स्कूल बना रही थी और कोई हमने 2200 लड़कियों के स्कूल बनाए गवर्नमेंट के साथ मिलके और 3 लाख से करीब लड़कियां इसमें एनरोल हो गई. तो एक गांव के अंदर एक औरत जो अपने बच्चों को स्कूल में नहीं दाखिल कर रही थी और हमने बड़ी उसकी मेहनत की. बहुत गरीब औरत थी, अफगानी रेफ्यूजी. उसने फिर बड़ी मुश्किल से अपने बच्चों को 2 को दाखिल किया. हम 6 महीने बाद जब जाते हैं उस स्कूल में दोबारा से, تو وہ بہت ناراض ہو کے آ رہی ہے اور پشتو میں غصہ کر رہی ہے اور کچھ بول رہی ہے. تو میں نے ٹیچر سے پوچھا, انٹرپریٹ کروایا کہ یہ بہت ناراض ہے آپ کے اسکول سے. ہاں کیوں ناراض ہے؟ تو اس عورت نے, ان پڑھ عورت جو کبھی کسی ہمارے انسٹیٹیوشنس میں نہیں گئی تھی, اس کا 4 بچوں کو اکیلے پال رہی تھی, شوہر مار دیا گیا تھا, کھیتی باڑی میں وہ مزدوری پہ کام کرتی تھی. اس نے کہا میرے پاس جب کھانا نہیں ہوتا تو میرا بچہ جب کہیں سے کھانا لاتا تھا تمہارے اسکول جانے سے پہلے, تو وہ بھوکا ہوتا تھا, مگر وہ ایک روٹی جب تک لا کے 4 ٹکڑے کر کے بانٹ کے نہیں کھاتا تھا, وہ اپنے پاس روٹی رکھے رہتا تھا. تمہارے اسکول سے بچہ میرے ابھی آیا ہے 3-4 دن پہلے, اور ایک بچے کے ہاتھ پہ ٹیچر نے اسٹار دیا ہوا تھا اور ایک میرے دوسرے بچے کو پاس نہیں تھا. تو میرا جو اسٹار جس کو ملا ہوا تھا بچہ, وہ اتنا خوش تھا اور اتنا پراؤڈ فیل کر رہا تھا, اور میرا جو دوسرا بچہ تھا وہ اس وقت بہت اداس تھا. مجھے تمہارا اسکول پسند نہیں آیا کیونکہ تمہارا اسکول سکھا رہا ہے میرے ایک بچے کو کامیابی میں خوش ہونا, اور اس کو یہ پتہ ہی لگ رہا ہے کہ اس کا دوسرا بھائی یا بہن جو ہے وہ اداس ہے, اور یہ تمہارا اسکول میرے بچوں کو الگ الگ کر دے گا. جب اس کو اپنے بھائی یا بہن کی اداسی نہیں نظر آ رہی اس کامیابی کے اندر, تو یہ بہت خطرناک ہے. یہ اس نے مجھے بتایا کہ تم اسکول نہیں ہے, تم ایک کمپٹیشن کو جنم دے رہے ہو جو انسانوں کو اور بچوں کو ڈیوائیڈ کرتی ہے, اور کسی بھی قسم کے ڈویژن میں, بائسز میں, اونچ نیچ میں, میں زیادہ تم کم میں, اس کے اندر لرننگ کیسے ہو سکتی ہے, اس کے اندر نالج بیس کیسے کریٹ ہو سکتی ہے. تو میرے خیال میں مجھے, کیونکہ میرے پاس ٹائم کم ہے, میں زیادہ نہیں بات کروں گی, جو ایسے بہت سارے میں نے زمینی اگزامپلز اپنے پچھلے 30-35 سال کی پیشورانہ زندگی میں لوگوں کے ساتھ اکراس پاکستان میں نے سیکھے ہیں اور سمجھے ہیں. تو مجھے یہ سمجھ میں آتا ہے کہ جو سینٹر ہے وہ انسان ہونا چاہیے. انسان جو ہے وہ خود بذات خود مکمل ہے, وہ اس کے پاس ساری چیزیں ہیں. اس کا تعلق یونیورس سے, یونیورس یہاں پہ میں یہ کہتی ہوں کہ یونیورس مینس سوشل, اکنامیکل, اس کو ہم ڈیفائن بھی کر سکتے ہیں اپنے ڈسکشن میں آگے. اس کا تعلق اور انگیجمنٹ یونیورس سے ہونا چاہیے, جس کی بیسز انالیسس پہ ہونی چاہیے, جس کی بیسز جو ہے وہ انالیٹیکل ہوں, اس طرح سے انالیٹیکل ہوں کہ نالج کریٹ ہو. میں سمجھتی ہوں کہ نالج کریٹ ہونا is the process of education, to create knowledge. ایک بچہ نالج کیسے کریٹ کرے, ایک انسان خود نالج کیسے کریٹ کرے, اور ہر انسان نالج کریٹ کر سکتا ہے. یہ چیز اداروں کے لیے نہیں ہے, یہ صرف ایکسپرٹس کے لیے نہیں ہے, یہ صرف ہم جیسے ایجوکیشن کے جو کوالیفائڈ سمجھے جاتے ہیں ان کے لیے نہیں ہے, ہر انسان کر سکتا ہے. یہ اسپیس ہم کس طرح سے ہر انسان کو مہیا کریں, اور انسان جو ادارے ہیں, جو انسٹیٹیوشنز ہیں, وہ انسان کے لیے ہونے چاہیے, نہ کہ انسان ان اداروں کو چلانے کے لیے ہو. اور جتنے زیادہ بچے آتے ہیں, جتنے یونیورسٹی میں زیادہ اسٹوڈنٹس ہیں, وہ کامیاب ہے ادارہ. اور چاہے کسی, تو اداروں کو پروٹیکٹ کرتے ہیں. جب آپ اداروں کو پروٹیکٹ کرتے ہیں تو اس کے اندر جو بھی کچھ ہو رہا ہے اس کو پروٹیکٹ کرتے ہیں. انسان کہیں پیچھے رہ جاتا ہے, اور جو فرد ہے وہ سامنے, اس کی وزڈم, اس کی آئیڈینٹی, اس کا جو اندر سے, جو اس کے اندر ایک انٹلیکچوئل وائبرنسی ہے, وہ اسٹرکچرز ان کو دبا دیتا ہے اپنے آپ کو ثابت کرنے کے لیے, کیونکہ کہیں سے ایک آئیڈیالوجی ہوتی ہے جس کے پیچھے آپ کو سب کو لگایا جاتا ہے. وہ اس فرد کی آئیڈیالوجی نہیں بنتی ہے. اگر ہم فرد سے شروع کرتے ہیں تو وہ سوسائٹی کی آئیڈینٹی بنتی ہے, سوسائٹی سے پھر وہ آپ کی نیشن کی اور اسٹیٹ کی اور دنیا کی گلوبل اس میں آئیڈینٹی میں جاتی ہے. ہمیں یہ اکائی سے شروع کرنا ہوگا, اور بے تحاشا ایگزامپلز ہیں میرے پاس اس کے, جو ہم نے انسٹیٹیوٹ فار ڈیولپمنٹ اسٹڈیز اینڈ پریکٹسز بنایا ہے بلوچستان کے ینگ لوگوں نے بنایا ہے. میں کراچی سے گئی ہوں, सारे इस इदारे को वहाँ के बच्चों ने बनाया है और कमाल का बनाया है। इसके अंदर इस कदर एक्सपीरियंशियल लर्निंग्स उन्होंने की हैं, इतनी ज़्यादा आउट ऑफ द बॉक्स उन्होंने आइडियाज़ को अपने इम्प्लीमेंट किया है, बिकॉज वी गिव इम्पोर्टेंस टू द इंडिविजुअल, क्योंकि इंसान इंडिविजुअल फोकस है और बाकी सारी चीज़ें उसके अराउंड हैं, क्योंकि यूनिवर्स जो है वो इंसान के चारों तरफ है और इंसान उसमें सेंट्रल है। हमें एजुकेशन सिस्टम्स के अंदर इंसान को सेंट्रल रखना पड़ेगा, इंडिविजुअल को सेंट्रल रखना पड़ेगा, उसकी पेस को डिटरमिन करना पड़ेगा, उसकी लर्निंग स्पीड को डिटरमिन करने पड़ेगा, वन शू फिट ऑल से निकलना होगा। ये सारे फिनोमेना, ये सारे स्ट्रक्चर जो हैं अब पूरी दुनिया के अंदर एजुकेशन के अंदर ये चैलेंज हो गए हैं। और मुझे बहुत खुशी है कि इसके अंदर रेफरेंस दिया गया है फिनलैंड का। श्योर, एब्सोल्युटली आउट ऑफ द बॉक्स वो नेशन जो हमें डिक्टेट कर रही थी, जिनको हम फॉलो करके और हम समझते थे कि हम अगर फला यूनिवर्सिटी से पीएचडी हैं और फला जगह का सर्टिफिकेट मिल जाता है तो हमारी जिंदगी बन जाती है। बिल्कुल नहीं जिंदगी बनी, शायद हमारी खुद की बन गई हो, लेकिन हमने अपने मुल्क की नहीं बना पाए, हमने अपने लोगों से नहीं जुड़े, हमें सिखाया नहीं, हमने नहीं सीखा कि हम पाकिस्तान के अंदर की खूबियां, ताकतें कैसे निकालें। हम सिर्फ बहुत सारे खराबियां बहुत अच्छी तरह से निकालते हैं, मगर मुझे जो नजर आता है पाकिस्तान में सिर्फ एक सूबे में 6 ज़बानें, 9 डायलेक्ट्स, कुजा पूरे पाकिस्तान में। क्यों हम इस जबानों की कदर नहीं करती हमारी एजुकेशन, बल्कि एक जबान सब लोग, एक जबान। व्हाई? Diversity of languages is an asset for education. Each language gives a culture. A culture is the basis of education, क्योंकि वो सदियों में आया है, सदियों की नॉलेज से बना है। तो ये चीजें हमें रिकग्नाइज हमारे एजुकेशन सिस्टम के अंदर हम कैसे लाएं, अनलेस हम उस फर्द को लेके आए सामने जो आया है, जो चाहता है, जिसके अंदर पहले से हमारी यकीन हो कि हाँ इसके अंदर कुदरत ने इसके अंदर सलाहियतें वो सब डाली हुई हैं। हमारा काम यह है कि इसको एनालिटिकल स्किल्स कैसे दें, इसको तज्जिया करना कैसे सिखाएं, इसको सही और गलत का रिसर्च बेस्ड एक तहकीकाना सोच के जरिए अपने आप को ऊपर और नीचे ले जाने की इंडिकेटर्स कैसे बनाएं। सिर्फ पैसे, सिर्फ स्टेटस, सिर्फ एक इंडिकेटर होगा खाली कि किस तरह से आपकी इंडस्ट्रीज और जो भी इकोनॉमिक इंडिकेटर्स हैं, इकोनॉमिक इंडिकेटर्स भी तो हमने नहीं बनाए हैं। इकोनॉमी को भी तो हमने, अभी सर कहे थे आईएमएफ, वर्ल्ड बैंक, इन लोगों ने इकोनॉमिक इंडिकेटर्स डिफाइन किए, हमने तो नहीं डिफाइन किए, हमारे इंडिकेटर्स तो वो नहीं है। हमें अपने लोगों को पहले समझना होगा, अपने जमीन को समझना होगा, अपने रिसोर्सेस को समझना होगा, अपने बच्चों को समझना होगा और उसके ऊपर हमें बिल्ड करना होगा उनके हिसाब से, और उनको हमें ट्रस्ट करना होगा कि एक गार्बेज कलेक्टर बच्चा जो है, क्या विजडम है उसके पास, क्या नॉलेज है उसके पास। लेट अस सिट विद आवर रियल पीपल एंड दे रियली विल हेल्प अस कि एजुकेशन क्या होनी चाहिए और कैसे होनी चाहिए। आई एम सॉरी, थोड़ा सा लंबा हो गया, बहुत माजरत से, लेकिन क्वेश्चन आएंगे तो बहुत सारा इसमें वजाहत पेश कर सकती हूँ क्वेश्चंस के अंदर।
Thank you very much. Inshallah, you'll get a chance. Very good ideas, Ji. I fully endorse what you're saying. Education must be experiential, must be critical, and that's why we put in Ken Robinson up front. So, Neelam Hussain Sahiba, aap bataiye, you are well-known educationist. MashaAllah, you've devoted your lifetime teaching in Connect College and doing many things. Neelam Bibi, aap please bataiye, I mean, how do we square the circle? We are offering education to kids, but they don't want it.
Nadeem, you'll have to speak louder. I can't hear your question.
My question was, GK, we are offering kids something that they don't want. What do we mean by education? जो सारी अभी सवाल किए हैं. What is your take on that? बताइए.
My take on education would be a form of learning which is inculcates in the child a curiosity, a joy for learning, a sense of wonder, which taps her or his creative potential, which makes learning an adventure, leading to cognitive growth, which is linked to that, moving on to building a knowledge base, moving on to developing problem-solving skills, moving on to learning social responsibility, relationships, so on and so forth. Now, a lot of talk today so far has been about what we desire or what we see education as being. I'm going to be a little more concrete. I'm going to look at, I've been doing a fairly close reading of the single national curriculum, and I'll just look at its 4 or 5 main areas briefly to see, I mean, it'll be open-ended. It is for you to decide whether the SNC will deliver what it offers to deliver. In its preface and in the main body of the text also, it foregrounds child-centered learning. It talks of creating a conducive environment, a safe environment, जहाँ बच्चा सवाल पूछेगा, जवाब देगा, गलतियाँ करेगा, खेल कूद से सीखेगा, and so on and so forth. And it sounds very wonderful. Then I go on to place it against the pedagogy. I mean, obviously, it entails a pedagogical shift from the rote learning, book-based examination system, जो कि आज तक हम पे हावी है और जिसमें ना बच्चा कुछ सीखता है, ना समझता है, वो रट्टा मार के पास हो जाता है, वो यूनिवर्सिटी तक पहुंच जाता है. And I know when graduates and postgraduates come to me, they have a very poor language skills and therefore very poor comprehension skills or logical skills. So the CNSC promises to change that. But when you set the CNSC side by side with the course content, with the the outputs, वहाँ problem आ जाता है. एक तो the kind of learning it is expounding demands participatory learning skills in teachers. It demands mother tongue learning, because a child who comes with a vocabulary of 200 words in her or his mother tongue, जब वो छुटते से स्कूल में आए और जैसे कुरुतुलैन ने कहा उसके ऊपर एक ज़बान मुसल्लत हो जिसे वो जानता नहीं है, तो वो अंधा और गूंगा और बहरा हो जाता है. अंधा शायद ना होता, गूंगा बहरा तो हो जाता है और परेशान हो जाता है. And that is the first blow that is struck at learning and education and its joy. That process continues because our teachers are part of the same system. They have limited knowledge because of that same system. और वो repeat करते हैं, वो रट के उल्टा उगल देता है इम्तिहान के पर्चे में, उसी पे उसे नंबर मिलते हैं. As a teacher, I know those of my students who did go in for independent thinking or writing were the ones who got lower marks. I still remember a student who was penalized for citing Edward Said, because obviously the examiner hadn't read him or it wasn't in the set guidebook. So what happens then? There is a lack of sync between the aspiration or the goal and the pedagogy. We don't have the teachers, there is no provision for teachers. अगर ये 2021 मार्च में ये शुरू हो रहा है सिस्टम, तो उतनी देर में आप हजारों लाखों उस्तादों को नहीं ट्रेन कर सकते into participatory learning. और वो कैसी learning होगी? Because in one of our workshops where we were dealing with teachers, Bloom's taxonomy की बात हुई, and they said they hadn't heard of it. Then when we started talking about it, ये हमने किया हुआ है, तो सर आपने बताया नहीं कि जी 100 बंदा क्लास सी मैडम गिटमिट करके टूर गई, यदि समझ आई यदि ना आई तैसी की करते. सो अगर उस टाइप की ट्रेनिंग होनी है, कैपेसिटी बिल्डिंग होनी है, तो ये नहीं चलेगा. एक तो ये है. दूसरा जो CNSC का एक प्रपोजल है in its attempt to bring all education systems ostensibly into the same stream is to, an increased burden on Quranic learning and religious learning, Islamiyat, although it talks about religious learning for all communities, पर focus इस्लाम पे है, दूसरों के लिए provision नहीं है. उसमें उसके लिए ये मदरसों से कारी, एक कारी और एक हाफिज हर स्कूल में इंडक्ट होंगे, from public sector to public low income private sector to the elite private sector schools. उनकी रोजी रोटी लग जाएगी. Very commendable.
Neelam, the national curriculum we are going to discuss. National curriculum we are going to discuss on 23rd. आज concept of education पे जरा गौर करें. और एक चीज है, national curriculum तो अपनी जगह है, but हम 70 साल से फेल क्यों कर रहे हैं?
70 साल से नदीम हम इसलिए फेल कर रहे हैं क्योंकि हमारा तालीम का एजेंडा है to create and promote a singular nationalistic religion based identity which is limited. I mean, patriotism, nationalism can be among the outcomes of education. They are not the sole premise of education. They should not be. Because हमने इतना महदूद दायरा किया है इस तालीम का कि वो बच्चे उसमें फंस जाते हैं. हम हिस्ट्री, हमारी अगर आप किताबें देखें तो वही, और खास तौर से ज़िया के बाद वही हमारे मजहबी आइकॉन्स हैं, वही हमारे पॉलिटिकल आइकॉन्स हैं, वही हम लैंग्वेज रीडर में पढ़ते हैं, वही हम इस्लामियात में पढ़ते हैं जहाँ तक रिलीजियस फिगर्स आर कंसर्न्ड, वही हम सोशल साइंसेज में पढ़ते हैं. देयर इज नो बिल्डिंग ऑफ अ नॉलेज बेस व्हिच इज रेलेवेंट टू टुडेज नीड्स. Then the textbooks are very poorly produced. They are unimaginative, they are dull, they are ungrammatical. So, and they are not commensurate with the child's age group for the most part. So there is a death to intellectual curiosity and the sense of wonder that we all feel education should inculcate in a child or awaken in a child. So ये एक लिमिटेशन है. फिर वो आपका इम्तिहान आ जाता है, आप रट्टा मार के इम्तिहान करते हैं, बच्चे कुछ नहीं समझते, तो पुअर रिजल्ट्स तो होंगे, पुअर रिजल्ट्स होंगे. उनका ये नतीजा है कि हमारी बहुत नैरो प्रेमिस है. वी नीड अ मल्टी एक्सियल होलिस्टिक अप्रोच टू लर्निंग व्हिच द CNSE टॉक्स अबाउट but does not then link up to implementation. In fact, it subverts it. I'm not going on to the CNSE, don't worry. But then our education has a huge gender bias. इसमें बहुत कोशिश हुई, शोर भी हुआ, 2006 के बाद कोई attempt भी हुए. वो क्या attempt थे? They were cosmetical and they lacked understanding. भाई आपने पहले औरतों की तस्वीरें नहीं होती थी, अब आप गिने, और ये मीटिंग टेक्स्ट बुक बोर्ड के साथ मीटिंग थी जिसमें they were judging books कि इसमें कितनी औरतें हैं तस्वीरों में, फिर वो कौन से पेशों में आती हैं. So again there's a bias. Usually the woman is absent or silent. The grammar books, the bias is built into the text. Amna's doll, Ali's school. So again the division comes. The stereotypes are worked upon. We have to make a break with those stereotypes. We have to create books which are imaginative, interesting, and which are then knowledge-based also. We need to tap resources of storytelling. Storytelling is a wonderful means of engaging a child, especially a preschooler or an early years in a primary school student, because कहानियों से वो सीखता है, conversation से सीखता है. One of the things we did in this project we were working with on teachers' education, we encouraged them to have conversation classes with kids. उसमें वो आके बताते थे आज हमने रास्ते में क्या देखा, आज हमारे घर में कल क्या हुआ जब हम घर गए. उनकी narrative skill भी बन रही थी, उनका confidence भी बन रहा था, but mind you, it was in the mother tongue. It was not in Urdu, it was not in English. और English तो उस्तादों ने कहा था सानू आप नहीं आंदी, पहले सिखाओ तो ऐसी पढ़ाइए. So that has to be addressed. I mean, there's a huge deficit of learning and capacity. I'm not saying our teachers are incapable. They are very bright people, but they have not had a chance to develop their capacity. They have not been given the knowledge. So these are the areas we need to address. Then we need to lessen the burden of religious learning. इतना बोझ है और इतनी ये डिवाइसिव फोर्स है जो कि बिल्कुल डिसरिगार्ड करती है. हम लफ्ज़ी तो कहते हैं कि रिलीजियस माइनॉरिटीज भी अपना पढ़ें, एथिक्स पढ़ लें. कहाँ पढ़ें? उस्ताद नहीं होते, स्कूलों में रखते नहीं उस्ताद. Perforce they are forced to read, study a religion which is not their own. Teachers are biased. Religious minority children are insulted and humiliated in the classroom. That is no way to teach a child. To humiliate, to lower self-esteem, I ask you, these are questions which don't need to be asked. These are self-evident facts which are not addressed. These are the areas which should be addressed. Then we need, उससे आगे बढ़े. I know पैसे नहीं है हमारे पास, बजट भी कटा है और एजुकेशन का, स्कूल टूटे हुए हैं, गुसल खाने नहीं है. अगर आप चाहते हैं कि बच्चा बेसिक हाइजीन सीखे, तो वो अगर साबुन पानी नहीं है, गुसल खाना नहीं है, वो कहाँ से सीखेगा? So all this has to be factored in. And
very good, Ji. Thank you.
I think I'll stop here.
Okay, thank you very much, Neelam. Thank you very much. Very kind of you. I think wonderful things, but I'll now turn to the panel. Anybody who wants to speak from the panel, please raise your hands. I'll call on you now. We've got Risham Najam, director of the grammar school system. Risham is also a young person, just taken over the grammar school system. So Risham, can you please say what you want to say? The floor is yours, Risham.
Well, let me start by saying I haven't taken over the grammar school system.
Okay,
before
sorry.
I get into some hot
wrong
water.
choice of words, wrong choice of words.
But I'm very much involved with the grammar school system. I'm going to talk from the point of view of someone who has studied and has a background in policy, but then went into as a practitioner. For the last 5 years, I've been working as a practitioner. And most of my responses are going to begin and end with the importance of teacher training, because I feel that all of the points that have been made today, which I agree with wholeheartedly, it's very difficult to do without teachers who have been trained. Instead of doing things with a sense of urgency and just, creating a policy and another policy and another policy, I think we really need to invest in implementation. We shouldn't be reactive. We need to kind of look at we need to go into the field and work backward. Where students are fighting against the tide to get to school, to give up wages, to go against gender norms. If you have children who are getting negative reinforcement at school, they're going to think, is this worth fighting for? So teacher training and pedagogy are a huge part of this. Are we going to train teachers? How? We can't just teach content in a didactic way, but make it student-centered. And engagement is a huge key to retention. So, somebody touched upon informal education, and I think we can't talk about informal education in the region without talking about the BRAC model. So for BRAC, for those of you who are not aware, is in Bangladesh, and it runs 50,000. It's an NGO which runs 50,000 schools. It educates around 1.5 million children. So it's not chump change. They're having a great impact. And one of the models, one of their huge models that they're using is non-formal education, because like many government schools, Bangladesh has the issue of, a rigid a rigid curriculum, and, children are not able to meet those goals. And so the purpose of this was to facilitate a system which is inflexible and bring children into it. So some of the schools are for children who've never attended school. Somebody wrote in the comments that, it's also important to have informal education to bring back people who, are adults and never made it through the system. So it's really for inclusivity. And one of the fundamental points of BRAC was teacher training. So they used one-room schoolhouses with about 30 children each. They handed every child a slate, a couple of books, and essentially they trained the teacher. And what they trained the teacher in? Pedagogy, child psychology, how to use classroom materials, and co-curricular activities, because this leads to engagement. And we cannot underestimate that, you know, in the younger years, and younger years are the most important, because as you lose children, they can never enter the higher years. You know, it's incredibly important to keep children engaged. Children learn even the most basic things like reading through co-curricular activities. So this is just sort of my kind of addition to what has been said so far.
Sure. Okay, great. Thank you, Resham. Let me bring in Dr. Neelam Hussain, also of the grammar school, although I don't want to make it seem like a grammar school thing, but Dr. Neelam Hussain Grammar School, she's also one of the founders of grammar school, and she's been very influential, set up a grammar school university as well. Neelam, I'm going to push back a little. I don't agree with this teacher training thing that Resham has said. In the days of Khan Academy, why do we need teacher training? In the days of internet, I also don't agree with with Neelam Hussain, the other Neelam Hussain. Why do we need to worry about language? I know my friend Abbas Rashid is here too. Sugata Mistra, for example, in India showed that language doesn't matter. Everybody, and in fact, somebody here also has done this study, that everybody here, even the uneducated people, are using Facebook. So why are we worried about language, and why are we worried about teacher training? Facebook is educating kids. I know uneducated kids who are using Facebook. So Neelam has also said, what's your take?
Can you hear me?
Gee, I can, Dr. Neelam, go ahead.
Gee, I wanted to talk more holistically. I agree with Shiraz because, you know, we are talking about curriculum here and design, and whether the payback over the last 70 years has been sufficiently rewarding for Pakistan and Pakistanis. अब जो भी हमारी practice रही है, I feel very strongly that we are 20 years into the 21st century. And we have not made any global connections whatsoever. And I feel that it's very important that we begin to realize that time is running out for us. And pragmatism is the need of the hour, which means in areas of education where we can make a step forward, they must be done immediately. And that means we do not standardize successful educational enterprise and ideas, because they act as a think tank alongside the public sector initiatives taken by the Ministry of Education. So what I'd like to say here is that in order to get a global 21st century connect, even if you say through the elite schools or through the think tanks or the good universities in Pakistan, we mustn't lose that footing. That footing will never come back. Let's first stay sure-footed on what we can do. And there are some things we are doing right, which are taking our students to the most prestigious centers of learning in the West on full scholarships, whether it is the Ivy Leagues, whether it is Oxbridge, it doesn't matter. On full scholarships, and for a third world person to go on a full scholarship to a globally connected university in the 21st century is a compliment to the implementation by certain educators. Now, where we have not lost out is where we need to stand firm. Where we need to gear up is where we have lost out. And as Shanaz very accurately said, there are multiple realities around them. One solution will not work for everything. It definitely will not. And for that, I would say that we have to be very creative in our problem solving. Some of the approaches that Resham said definitely apply to literacy programs, to initiating education in communities, and must be followed. It's a beautiful example. However, I feel that if the national curriculum as designed by the Ministry of Education tends to lead towards, you see, curriculums have philosophical leanings. And this particular paradigm of indoctrination comes from idealism. And idealism is a philosophical leaning that is a little ancient in curriculum development. In the 21st century, for us to globally connect, we must base our curriculum on pragmatism, realism, and also existentialism. Now you will say, where do you get it? It exists. It exists in the research manuals. It exists on the data. आप 70 साल से देखिए, आपका curriculum is based on idealism, where the learner is a vessel and the teacher pours into the vessel whatever it wants it to learn. And if you take ideological indoctrination, or you take any other belief system, it calls for no response. It calls for an absolute nod. So when you begin to put too much idealism into a curriculum mode, the methodologies change. If you are using pragmatism, existentialism, and realism, it's exploratory. There's no curriculum. Concepts are given out, and the learner becomes the teacher. And how does the learner become the teacher? It could be a child in Balochistan learning in Balochi. It could be a child in the Punjab learning in Punjabi, or an English medium child. Why? Because they've been allowed to explore. And if you say there are not enough trained people on board, how about television being used as a means of teaching children in the outreach? In the mother tongue, with exploration and central to the design of learning. And this is my idea. I do feel that we've lost out. And you know what I particularly feel? We've gained some ground by sending our students overseas. But what was very disappointing is that when analysis was done on the best universities, the 500 best universities in the world, sadly, our dear country did not feature in that list. And that worries me hugely, because when the base of the pyramid is warped, the top of the pyramid also wobbles. Thank you.
Thank you, Neelam. I think at this point, I have to bring in Shahid Kardar, Vice Chancellor of Beacon House University. Shahid, you've just been told that our university system is failing, that we have nobody in the top 500, which is agreed, entirely agreed. It's a fact. So tell me, what are we doing? Why are we failing? And Shahid is an economist, so he needs to give me support. Go ahead.
Okay. Listen, okay. But I have a problem with much of the argument. I can see Shanaz is smiling. Okay. The real issue is, I hear a lot of people, a lot of them are referring to some of the elite schools, so I won't go into them. The real issue is what you highlighted in terms of the lower stratum of society, which is not going to get a fair deal in this system. Social mobility, and of course you talked about, labor market problems and so on. Economic growth has also been an issue. But more importantly, how do you give them mobility? And I plead, in this day and age, we are bloody lucky that we live in an age where, frankly, none of these teachers, I repeat, none of these teachers, most of them in the public school system and perhaps also in the universities, frankly, are unemployable. The internet can provide me more knowledge than all of them can provide to me. So how do you give, and you very rightly said, that child, that man who's totally illiterate, the way he uses his Facebook, the way he uses WhatsApp, the way he uses that little instrument called the cell phone, frankly, we need to understand that we need to give him an acceleration which is now possible thanks to technology, thanks to the internet, and thanks to the cost factor as well. Because I keep hearing this whole business of, we haven't spent enough money in the school. I'm glad we haven't. I mean, if that's the quality you're getting, I'm glad we haven't put enough money into the schooling system. So to me, the pace of change in terms of knowledge, in terms of the instruments that are available, frankly, our institutions are totally out of sync. ये आपने government को देख ली, everything that any government will touch in Pakistan, the state of Pakistan will touch will turn to dust. खुदा का वास्ता है इनसे ले लो. And thanks to, so what would I do? तकरीर करने की मकसद ये था. For heaven's sake, what I would do, unfortunately for little kids, we probably have to have some kinds of physical attendance. I'm talking about only up to the primary level. But by that time, I would give them tablets, small little tablets, and install SIMs in them. It'll be cheaper than what the government does in terms of giving them free textbooks. वो बच्चा जो सीख जाएगा आप सारी उम्र नहीं सिखा सकते. It'll be far cheaper. Give them the tablets and he will get far better education, particularly in disciplines where we don't have that quality to begin with. Language le lo, sciences le lo, you don't have the teachers who will ever be able to provide that quality. That tablet, which the prices have come down enormously globally, and you install SIMs in them, believe me, you will see a difference that none of us, and particularly these kids from less affluent backgrounds, and I think all of us will agree, are far, far more street smart than our children and our grandchildren. So give them that kind of exposure. Usko aaj ye de denge na, he will leapfrog where they have been left behind. But हम यही बातें करते रहेंगे एच सिंगा इनको सिलेबस पढ़ा दो फलां को करा दो ऐसा देखो नहीं होना. You're far better off using technology, and as you said, examples are all there. Khan's Academy, a lot of people are also converting them into Urdu. And as technology develops, you and I both know, all of us know, वो अंग्रेजी में बोल रहा होगा and the child will be listening to all that. That's a fact of life. The pace of change is such that please rely on these instruments. These institutions, आपने देख लिया ये रियासत जो है ये कुछ नहीं कर सकती. आपने has this state been able to adapt to technology? It hasn't, and you're expecting कि वो जो state को चला रहे हैं, who've actually sorted out their education problem by sending their children to elite schools, are actually worried about the education system. Far better. Use this, give it to them. Believe me, they will leapfrog.
Thanks, Shahid. I think you raised a very good point about street smart. I find that these kids are street smart, and we are trying to give them Wuthering Heights, as that clip said, that we are trying to teach them things that really don't mean anything to them, and they kind of turn away from that. I've got a couple of very interesting things that
his exposure today, one had heard of garbage in, garbage out. His exposure today is such that you take very high quality input in, and you're producing garbage. I'm talking about the public schooling system.
Let me bring in Beacon House here. We've got Nasir Kasuri, a director of Beacon House. Nasir, can you please tell us what does education mean for you, and how are we using the new paradigms, the new technology in education, and how do we address our issues? Not just Beacon House, you're an elite system. How do we spread out education in the country? Please, Nasir, your take.
Yeah. I actually wanted to refer back to one of the questions you asked before about teacher training, because I think it underlies a lot of the conversation we've been having. आपने पूछा था कि you disagreed with Risham when she said I think teacher training is the key, and you said that with with the technology that's available now in the internet and Khan Academy, why is it the key? I think that actually in some ways underlies the key transformation that's required in how we actually view education. The internet, there's a wealth of information available on the internet. Anything I don't know right now, I can pretty much Google it in 2 seconds, and I can have that information at my disposal. I think it was one of the speakers before that spoke about knowledge development. Knowledge development is more about bringing disparate ideas together to develop new ideas. Now, the thing is, the internet can give you a lot of existing knowledge and information, but it can't necessarily train you to process that information in a meaningful way and produce new ideas and produce new knowledge. And that is essentially what is required in 21st century education. So in fact, the need for teacher training, I would say now, is even more than it was perhaps before. I mean, as educators in Beacon House, we know, for example, it's very easy to recruit teachers who are going to just, go through a curriculum and tell students how something is. To train teachers to engage with students and get them to collaborate and generate new knowledge and ideas, which the teacher might not have thought of themselves. That's a tremendous art, actually. That's very, very difficult. That is one of the things that we, in Beacon House struggle with in our teacher training programs, and how do we move teachers away from didactic teaching to something where they actually, encourage the student to be creative and create new knowledge. And that requires a lot of teacher training. So I actually agree with Risham that if we're going to give meaningful education, we do need to invest in teacher training. I certainly believe that giving technology to students will open them up to a wealth of knowledge and information, and it should definitely be done. But in order to bring ourselves to the level that some of the leading 21st century economies are operating at these days, we actually need teachers that can work with students. And in fact, go towards a flipped classroom model where classroom time is not spent giving students information. It's spent in conversation, discussion, collaboration, where the teacher is a facilitator and the students are encouraged to develop new knowledge. So in fact, the need for teacher training is quite significant. In the 21st century, we're going through a tremendous, paradigm shift. AI, artificial intelligence, and robotics have become so advanced now that even things like, accounting and medical diagnosis are being moved over to AI. And it's quite likely that in the next 10 years, in fact, it's projected that in the next 15 years, more than half the jobs that exist today won't even exist. So it's really, really important that we focus on creativity, collaboration, and knowledge development, skills and attributes that will help students really succeed in this 21st century paradigm. Sorry, there's a, can I just, one.
Now, sir, unmute yourself. Unmute.
Okay, G, I'm unmuted. Can you hear me now, G?
Yeah, we can hear you.
I'm sorry. I'm actually in Dubai. I had a screaming baby in the background.
No problem.
And I had to.
Go ahead. No problem. No problem. We understand.
So anyway, I'm back. I'm back in business now. So I was talking about creating an environment where students are in a position where they can develop new knowledge, because that's going to be necessary. Anything we teach our students today may be obsolete in the future. It may be replaced by new information. Unless we teach them to adapt and be creative and constantly evolve. It's projected that in the future, people will not have one career. They may have multiple careers in life. They most likely will. Unless they can develop new knowledge, they are going to become redundant very quickly. And that is why teachers need to be retrained in order to educate in a different way. In many ways, the way students used to be educated before the Industrial Revolution, it used to be a more informal system and there used to be more conversation. So I think we need to go towards that. I know just one other thing I'd like to say. I know that this is not the conversation about the national curriculum, and there's a lot more to say there. But, I think this, what's happening with the national curriculum also, I think, relates to this question about what does education mean? And, I think the government's intentions are very honorable, but, the problem is that, a lot of times I'm on the National Curriculum Committee as well. And every time I hear them speak, the word that keeps coming to my mind is indoctrination, indoctrination and control. We want kids to have, a sort of a single vision of what Pakistan should be. We want to indoctrinate them into a certain belief system. I believe that, to be honest, that is the complete antithesis of what education should be. I mean, we have to ask ourselves, is the purpose of education to liberate an individual or to control an individual? And I think that needs to be asked by educationists all over the world. Increasingly in the West, they're now answering that question by saying the role is to liberate individuals. My fear is that in Pakistan, unless we sort of refocus, we understand what directions the world is moving towards in the 21st century. And if we keep focusing on control and indoctrination, and that becomes a fundamental part of what our curriculum is, then we will lose out, and whatever other grand aspirations we might have will fall flat because the basic intentions behind the curriculum will be wrong. And that's always been my argument in the National Curriculum Committee. And I fear it. I fear that, we will weed out creativity, freedom of thought, and we will in fact, have a retrogressive form of education, which will not in fact prepare students for the 21st century, and they'll become global losers. So what is education? It's all about, for me, it's all about creativity. It's about creation. It's about coming out with new ideas. It's about empathy, because we live in an increasingly connected world. We need to be able to tolerate and accept each other's views and get past those barriers and collaborate with each other to create new knowledge. Our teachers need to be trained to help students achieve this eventually very difficult, to acquire this fairly complex skill set. And we need to recognize that once we do, and once we make that our focus, only then can we give meaningful education. Otherwise, I agree with some of the other speakers. And in fact, aapne khud kaha tha ki if people are walking out of schools, if all we're doing in our schools is giving them propaganda and indoctrinating them and not actually preparing them for the reality that they're going to face when they go into the workforce, then it is pretty useless. And I do agree with you that perhaps one can understand why they're walking out. So yeah, that is my perspective.
Thank you, Nasser. Thank you very much. Very kind of you. Let me turn to the public sector. We don't have, unfortunately, public sector doesn't like to participate in these things, which is kind of sad, but we've got Ahmed Rajwana. Ahmed Rajwana used to be a bureaucrat.
Can I just have 1 minute? Just 1 minute. I just wanted to touch base on this business of teacher training. Again, I go back to the public school teachers to begin with. Trouble here, most of them, and Shiraz knows this better than anyone I can think of, can't even pass the class 5 exam. Unko kya train karenge? I'm trying to understand kya training denge. The foundations actually are so weak. So that's the first. Second, when it even comes to the elite schools, I ask a very simple question. How many of them actually improve the quality of the way they deliver their lessons using free courses being delivered or provided on the internet? How many of them actually do this? I mean, I look at teachers even at university level, not even using Coursera, which is free, lectures where you can actually improve your own offering. So I'll just stop here.
Good point. Ahmed Rajwana, how do you answer that? Should we close down public schools altogether? Should we send those teachers packing? And what grade do you have teachers in? Your teachers are all at 8, 9, 10, 11 grade. Are they fit to be teachers? Ahmed Rajwana, give us a take on the public system.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Well, it's a really fairly complicated question. When we talk about having these teachers, and there is this criticism on teachers that the teachers are not well trained and they do not have the capacity. Well, I tend to disagree with that. We recently experimented with World Bank's Teach tool, and we measured the teaching skills of about 225,000 teachers. That's 225,000, which is like about 2.5 lakh teachers ko humne gauge kiya. And they're fairly okay, but they're not all at par with what they should be in the public, in the private sector. But in the public sector, they're just doing fine. But agar aap इसको सिस्टम को ठीक करना चाहते हैं, then आपको जो चीज देखने की है वो ये है कि where the world is going. I tend to agree with Sarkardar what he is saying कि हम सिस्टम के अंदर थोड़ी सी चीजों को फिक्स करने की कोशिश करते हैं. इसको एक सिस्टमैटिक पूरे सिस्टम को चेंज की जरूरत है, ओवरहॉल की जरूरत है. अगर आप पब्लिक सेक्टर के एक्सपेंडिचर को देखें तो 80% उसका एक्सपेंडिचर HR के ऊपर है. अबाउट कोई 20% एक्सपेंडिचर है जिसमें फ्री टेक्स्ट बुक्स और ये बाकी सारी चीजें जाती हैं. तो आप इसमें क्वालिटी के ऊपर क्या बात करेंगे जब आपने इतना बड़ा एक सिस्टम बनाया है जिसको आप सेंट्रली मेजर करते हैं या सेंट्रली देखते हैं. जब तक वो आपके एक इंडिविजुअल इलाके के ऊपर एक बच्चे की नीड के हिसाब से, जिस तरह से इन द स्टार्ट ऑफ द डिस्कशन देयर वाज दिस कन्वर्सेशन ऑन गोइंग टुवर्ड्स कि जहाँ पे इंडिविजुअल बच्चे के ऊपर आप फोकस करके काम कर रहे हो, जब तक आप सिस्टम को उस पर नहीं लेके जाएंगे इट कांट वर्क. बट वेदर अब अगर आप कहते हैं कि जी पब्लिक सेक्टर जो है मुकम्मल तौर पे ख़त्म कर देना चाहिए, अगर आप स्टेटिस्टिक्स को देखें तो कोई अबाउट 55% तो प्राइवेट सेक्टर आ गया है इसमें. और बात फिर डिबेट उसी बात पे चली जाती है कि पब्लिक गुड है या प्राइवेट गुड है, इसकी अल्टीमेट एंड रिजल्ट क्या है. और लास्टली जो पॉइंट मैं इधर रेस करना चाहता हूँ, ये जो टैबलेट्स की बात हो रही है इसके ऊपर भी इन्वेस्टमेंट है. और ये जो अभी कोर्सिया की बात कर रहे थे, हम में से कितने पब्लिक सेक्टर में टीचर्स हैं जिनको हमने ट्रेन किया है. अगर आप हमारा ट्रेनिंग का सिस्टम देखें तो वो इतना आउटडेटेड है और इतना पुराना है और वो इतना रिडिकुलस है, उसको कोई ठीक करने की कोई कोशिश नहीं करता. जो पीपल दोज हु ट्राई टू डू दैट, दे आर नॉट एबल टू फिक्स इट बिकॉज आपके सिस्टम के अंदर इनर्शिया इतना ज्यादा है कि जब भी आप कोई बात करते हैं यू टर्म्ड एज अ रैडिकल एंड यू थ्रोन आउट ऑफ द सिस्टम. तो सिस्टम को ठीक करना जो है वो एक वाइडर डिबेट की जरूरत है. और जैसे अभी कसूरी साहब बात कर रहे थे, आई रिमेम्बर अबाउट 4-5 years ago आई वाज वर्किंग विद वर्ल्ड इकोनॉमिक फोरम और वहाँ पे फ्यूचर ऑफ जॉब्स के ऊपर एक को पिछले 5-6 साल से काम हो रहा है. तो आप लोगों को वो चीज पढ़ाएं या बच्चों को वो चीज सिखाएं जैसे इमोशनल इंटेलिजेंस है, सो दैट आने वाले वक्तों में वो बच्चे जाके कहीं कोई काम कर सकें, किसी जगह पे एडजस्ट कर सकें. अगर आप सिर्फ इसी डिबेट में रहेंगे कि जी सिंगल नेशनल करिकुलम होना चाहिए या आप टीचर्स को ट्रेन कर दें, आपको इसको देखना पड़ेगा पब्लिक सेक्टर के सिस्टम की कॉम्प्लिकेशंस को कि वो किस कदर कॉम्प्लेक्स है और उसका साइज इतना ज्यादा है कि आप उसको इकट्ठे एक गो में किसी एक सेंट्रलाइज्ड जगह से ठीक नहीं कर सकते. सो इट्स वेलकम स्टेप टू हैव दिस कन्वर्सेशन गोइंग ऑन एट लीस्ट इन दिस वाइडर ऑडियंस.
Okay, thank you. अच्छा देखिए जी, I think I'm very confused. I'm not figuring out what education is, what we should do. We've gotten to administration कि teachers भी होने चाहिए, ये भी होना चाहिए, वो भी होना चाहिए. But quite frankly, I see when I talk to the poor kids, which I did just recently for this webinar, I talked to a few of the kids who are going to public schools, and I looked at their curriculum and I looked at what they're doing. They're carrying bags of book and they're out learning. But at the same time, nobody is looking at the fact that they've got the street smarts. The kid does go shopping for his parents. The kid does do chores for his parents. The kid does do some things around. We are not leveraging that. The kid is using Facebook. The kid is doing all those things. We are not leveraging that. There is a dichotomy between work experience and a school experience. And that dichotomy, I think, is going all around and it's destroying their critical thinkings altogether. So Amreen Gilani worked in the World Bank. She's on a panel, on a round table. Amreen Gilani has long experience in education. Amreen, Bibi, will you answer that, please?
Yes.
What are we doing wrong? Wrong. Go ahead, G. Go ahead, Amreen. Amreen, floor is yours. Unmute, Amreen. Unmute, please. Unmute.
Yes.
Go ahead.
I'm unmuted.
Gigi, go ahead.
Okay, so I mean, based on your question and the discussions that have been going on this forum, I mean, one needs to look at what the education paradigm really is. It's a broad area and it's an evolving area, obviously, with the way the world is changing, right? So we have to start from a certain point and then sort of try to fix the system based on that. And that point is really the returns to education that we are looking for. So see, Neelam first talked about this single, the focus has been that we want this single religious national identity, right? So I mean, that's been a focus over the years, but what is the real focus? It should be actually, basic numeracy, literacy, then the critical thinking, creativity skills that everyone's been speaking about. And most importantly, which, I mean, I'm looking more at the public sector and the low-cost private school space, because that's where most of the population goes. And that's where we need those kind of returns. And for those parents, the most important critical return is actually jobs, remuneration, social mobility. So if that is what we want our education system to provide, we have to start with that and then align the system to it. Like, so what comes in education? There's governance. There's these days the focus has been on enrollment and retention and improving quality. So within these three areas, everything that we've been talking about falls in. So in governance, how is it that public schools are sort of reporting to the provincial level, to the district level? How is the funding flowing? We have to look at that. We have to fix that area. Then we have to look at enrollment and retention. Why are people not putting there? Why are the poor people not putting kids in school? And even if they do put them in school, why are they not keeping them there? Because obviously there's no quality. They don't see them even writing like 4 lines, understanding, like doing reading comprehension or doing basic numeracy, which, I mean, if they even saw those, they would keep them in school because those have benefits in whatever even business you start or if you work somewhere, right? And in terms of quality, like this whole debate about using technology in education, teacher training, using like pedagogy, all of that falls into that area. And you have to, I mean, you have to start from the point of what is it that you want from your education system. And because we've been very confused about our returns to education too, right? So we have to start from that and then align each of those areas and, I mean, focus really on the public school system. I mean, you cannot do away with the public school system. Look at, like, for example, when all the schools closed, you started this TV online sort of education system. But most of the people, I mean, these systems only work when it's interactive, when you have a tablet, when you can do an assessment in the end. I mean, they're not going to work if most of the population doesn't have access, right, to an interactive tablet. So you have to think about this before doing away with public schools completely, before saying that teachers are useless. Yes, you have to change the system, but you cannot eliminate it altogether.
Look, let me correct myself. Ambreen, you're absolutely right. Nobody's saying do it away tomorrow. But the question is, we have to entertain these thoughts. But here I'll bring in somebody who I'm holding in reserve, but we will not talk about that. Mehboob Mahmood, I don't want you to talk about technology today. We'll do it day after tomorrow or whenever. But I want you to bring in this, which we've discussed often enough. Experiential learning. For example, Mehboob uses bees and beekeeping as an educational tool. He uses he's also developed a financial literacy program. As I said, the kid who's going to do these chores, going shopping, etc., he has no financial literacy. Should he have financial literacy? Financial literacy does not figure in our curriculum or in our teaching at all. In fact, I know when I grew up, I had no financial literacy. So Mehboob, can you just quickly talk about that? As I said, your main speech thing is in a few days, but just on those subjects, please.
You know, I think that the Ottomans had a very good saying, which they plastered on their schools, which said that no bird will be taught how to swim and no fish will be taught how to fly. I think it's well established in education that if you can hook into a child's prior learning, if you can build on what they know already, children are not empty vessels. That idea is now gone. And children construct their worlds through meaning and knowledge of what they have previously. So the closer we are into the ground in terms of building an education system that really looks at what is it that the kids know. If you're a farmer, you know how to, you grow up with the knowledge of weather, of plowing fields. If you then use math and you relate it to that, if you relate stories to that. So we have to kind of look at our ground realities and look at what is it that our kids are learning in a pre-literate world, and how can we hook into that experience, because everyone's learning. So learning is taking place. How do we hook into that learning and then transport kids upwards? So I think rather than creating curriculum top down, we should really be creating curriculum from the bottom up. Let's really look at how we can construct knowledge from the actual experiential base of our people. And if we can manage to do that, we can probably get effective learning. It will obviously be grounded in vernacular languages. It will be grounded in actual experience. And it will probably be much cheaper as well, because you're teaching from the ground up. So we need to start doing things very differently.
Thank you. Thank you, Mehboob. I think that's very correct. I think as we've talked about, Mehboob, for example, think about it. Why can't we have students learning how to grow things in their school patches or something? Why can't we have students doing things that mean something, like they're going out shopping? Why can't they understand how to collect their change and things? But no, we have got them reading Wuthering Heights, as that clip said.
Yeah, and you know, this issue of dropout, I think Alif Ilan did one study about 5-6 years ago, and certainly from my experience, what I've seen, people say the number one reason in Pakistan for kids dropping out is economics, or number two reason is girls shouldn't go, social factors, shouldn't go to school after a certain age. But this Alif Ilan study, and certainly in my experience, what I found is the number one reason is the motivation of the child. If the child is not engaged, if the child is not doing well, they will drop out. So building confidence, it's more important to build confidence in a kid than to teach them any one particular thing. If they get confidence that they can learn, that step will take them further and further, and some will get further along and some won't. We don't have to build rocket scientists with every kid. We have to take the general population level up, education level up. We are at a very, very, very primitive state of education and knowledge in this country. So even if we can get from the very low base that we are to doubling our per capita income, we can do it with a reasonably modest degree of overall attainments in terms of education attainments, but do it in a uniform way so that people can read signs and can, know how to do plumbing and basic things. And then the kids who are smarter can go further along.
Very good point. Exactly. Anybody else wants to say anything from the panel, or should I go to the floor? Round table, anybody? Okay. Let's have Zahra. Gigi, please, Shana, please.
Thank you very much. I just want to say again that, when we talk about education in Pakistan, education is not one single monolithic arrangement or system or experience. So one has to recognize कि जो ज़मीनी हकीकत है, जिसके बारे में बहुत सारे और दूसरे स्पीकर्स ने भी उसका इशारा दिया है, यहाँ पे बहुत मुख्तलिफ किस्म के निज़ाम चल रहे हैं पाकिस्तान में। जो पब्लिक सेक्टर का निज़ाम है, उसमें भी बहुत सारे इलाके हैं जहाँ पे आप छोटे छोटे बलूचिस्तान के गांव में जो स्कूल है, और जो पब्लिक सेक्टर स्कूल लाहौर के अंदर है या मुल्तान में है या इस्लामाबाद में है, बड़े ज़बरदस्त फेडरल गवर्नमेंट के पब्लिक सेक्टर स्कूल्स हैं। एक वो भी निज़ाम है, और एक कोई छोटा किली और गोट और दूर दराज इलाके में जो स्कूल है, वो भी एक निज़ाम है। इसी तरह प्राइवेट सेक्टर निजी स्कूलों में भी बहुत मुख्तलिफ किस्म के स्कूल्स हैं। मदरसे का भी निज़ाम है, बड़े बड़े गैरसन आर्मी कंटोनमेंट स्कूल्स हैं। तो कोई एक हकीकत नहीं है तालीमी निज़ाम की पाकिस्तान में। ये हमें बार बार, मेरा तो ख्याल है, मेरे सामने तो जो मेरा तजुर्बा रहा है वो ये है कि आप जब किसी तालीम के बारे में बात करते हैं, आई एग्री विद एवरीवन, यस, क्रिएटिव लर्निंग, चाइल्ड सेंटर्ड, इंक्वायरी ओरिएंटेड, टेक्नोलॉजी इनेबल्ड, IT भी लेकर आए, सब कुछ करें, लेकिन हम नहीं कर पाए। पाकिस्तान में हम नहीं कर पाए क्योंकि हुकूमत का जो निज़ाम है, जो सरकार की कैपेसिटी है किसी चीज को डिलीवर करने के लिए, वो बहुत महदूद होती जा रही है और हो गई है. Neither is the health system well run. 75% of Pakistan's population does not go to public sector hospitals. Increasingly, whoever can afford it in Pakistan is putting their child in private sector schools. 45% of your enrollments are in private sector schools. The government no longer, when you talk, Nadeem, about what should this paradigm be, I'm increasingly being convinced the fact that the government cannot run and manage schools. They should finance schools. There are multiple ways in which school delivery is taking place. Zabardast Dil ka model hai, BRAC का मॉडल रिशम ने बात की है बांग्लादेश के बारे में, हम सबको मालूम है इसका बहुत कुछ कि किस तरह वो कितना सक्सेसफुल है. यहाँ पे सिटीजन्स फाउंडेशन का मॉडल है, बहुत सारे मॉडल्स हैं. स्कूल गवर्नमेंट को फाइनेंस करना चाहिए उन मॉडल्स को जहाँ पे इफेक्टिव तालीम दी जा रही है. मैं मुख्तसर बात करूंगी क्योंकि ये बहुत एक गहरी किस्म की और बड़ी दिलचस्प गुफ्तगू है तालीम के बारे में. But multiple realities need multiple solutions. I just say that. You cannot just IT technology into remote rural areas where there's no readiness for it.
No, I appreciate that, Shanaz, and we'll inshallah have more time to talk about it. But Ji, please go ahead. Go ahead.
Ji. Nadeem, may I say something? Acha, Kurat keh le.
First Kurat, and then you can certainly.
जी बहुत शुक्रिया. मैं ज़बरदस्त डिस्कशन हुआ है और डिस्कोर्स हुआ है. I think there's a lot of wisdom there. और of course bits and pieces में है और अपने models हैं. मैं समझती हूँ PIDE जो है should really launch several researches, longitudinal researches, क्योंकि ये हमारी बहुत कमी है educational development में, researches नहीं है हमारे यहाँ. ये ज़रूरी है, बहुत ज़रूरी है इन सब आइडियाज़ के ऊपर. मैं यहाँ पे ऐड करना चाहूँगी कि एक्सपीरियंशियल लर्निंग में कि यकीन जानिए इतना अफसोस और दुख हुआ जब स्कूल के अंदर से गाय और भैंस और बकरियां ऊंट पालने वाले बच्चों को ये कह के बहुत बिलिटल किया जाता है कि ये क्या पढ़ेंगे, ये तो चरवाहे हैं. जब वापस देखते हैं तो बलूचिस्तान में ये चरवाहों की वजह से 30% रेवेन्यू आता है, सारे ये ऊंट और बकरियां और दुम्बों की वजह से. मगर इसकी उस बच्चे को उन लोगों को रिकग्निशन ही नहीं है. वो उनसे आप बात करें तो दे फील सो अपोलोजेटिक और कहते हैं कि जी हम तो देखें अनपढ़ जाहिल है ना, तो इसलिए हम ये काम करते हैं. तो हम किस इकोनॉमी की बात कर रहे हैं? इकोनॉमी में तो हैं ये लोग. आपके पंजाब की का दूध जो है, वी आर द आई डोंट नो विच नंबर मिल्क प्रोड्यूसिंग कंट्री, मगर वो दूध जो पालने वाला गाय पाल रहा है, जो कर रहा है, उसकी अपनी हैसियत क्या है? हमारी तालीम जो है वो हैसियतें मुतय्यन करती है. ये जो है जब तक हम इसको एड्रेस नहीं करेंगे कि जो लोग इकोनॉमी में इतना बड़ा शेयर दे रहे हैं वो इस मेन स्ट्रीम एजुकेशन सिस्टम उनको एक्नॉलेज एज अ डिग्निफाइड रिस्पेक्टेबल इंडिविजुअल या बच्चे नहीं समझता है और उनको एक्सक्लूजन में है. हमारी बहुत बड़ी तादाद एक्सक्लूजन में है. एक तो इस वजह से. दूसरी जो है, जो मैं यहाँ पे लाना चाहूँगी कि हमें अपनी एजुकेशन सिस्टम में जो हालात हमारे रहे हैं पिछले 30 सालों से 40 सालों से, उससे बहुत इंटरनल रूह की स्कारिंग हुई है. रूह की स्कारिंग जब बच्चों ने अपने माँ बाप को मरते हुए देखा है, कत्ल होते हुए देखा है, बॉम्ब ब्लास्ट के अंदर हशर देखा है. आप इन बच्चों से या इन टीचर्स से जो इससे गुजरे या पूरे लोग, वो कैसे कर सकते हैं मीनिंगफुल एनवायरनमेंट पैदा कर सकते हैं लर्निंग की? ये वाला हमारा हीलिंग का क्या प्लान है? पूरा नेशन जो है एक बहुत बड़े दौर से गुजरा है और गुजर रहा है, और कुछ खत्ते तो बहुत ही शिद्दत से गुजर रहे हैं. हम उनके लिए क्या कर रहे हैं? वही उन्हीं को तो पढ़ाना है, उन्हीं की तो एजुकेशन है, उन्हीं की तो बात कर रहे हैं, मगर वो तो जख्म है अंदर से. तो इसका हम क्या करें? मैं तो इसके जाके स्टक हो जाती हूँ और समझ में नहीं आता कि इनसे क्या बात करें, किस चीज की बात करें. जब दिल से खून रिस रहे हैं तो आप क्या पढ़ाएंगे, क्या करेंगे, आप क्या कर सकते हैं? बस ये. I think
आप बिल्कुल ठीक कह रही हैं, but look, let's be reasonable. After all, in Europe there was a huge cataclysm And, Nazi Germany and the Jews experienced a lot. Yet we saw a number of Nobel Prize winners coming out of that. So I think humans are very stable and very capable of healing. But I think I appreciate what Shahnaz said, KG, diversity is important. But look, that diversity exists. But I think, quite frankly, enough diversity does not exist. We need far more diversity. There's far more uniformity that I see than diversity. The uniformity is in everybody trying to do the same thing and not enough different kinds of paradigms in education. And I worry about that a lot. But let me come back. I think Neelam wanted to say something. Did you?
Yes.
Neelam,
I wanted to talk about bottom-up education. I'm sorry, I came thinking of something else, so I didn't come into these paradigms initially. Mother tongue learning, जैसे एक साहब ने अभी पहले भी बात की कि you build on the child's existing knowledge, you build on the child's existing language. और वो नदीम आपने कहा कि language की क्या ज़रूरत है, तो I mean obviously it was a deliberate mischievous question कि when Facebook is there and so on and so forth, why do we need language skills? We need language skills to, I mean फिर तो आप emoji पे भी गुजारा कर लेते हैं. But language is where we live. Language is what shapes us. So if we start with our own mother tongue, build a school-going child has a vocabulary of कच्ची का बच्चा 200 लफ्ज की vocabulary लेके आता है, उसका culture, उसका तजुर्बा लेके आता है. उस पे build कीजिए, उसका confidence हो, and then diversity है, as you say, but that diversity is constant bit to uniformitize it. Through the language that diversity opens up, the confidence opens up. And the other thing which is a reason for school dropouts is the corporal punishment, the violence. एक violence होता है जब कि आप एक ज़बान मुसल्लत करते हैं बच्चे पे and you denigrate his or her experience. The other is of actual physical violence to which our children are subjected, and not just in the public sector schools. Humiliation is at multiple levels. It can be class-based humiliation in the more elite schools. कि किसी ने brand name पहना या नहीं पहना से लेके गरीब बच्चे की और humiliation आती है कि तुम्हारे घर में उर्दू नहीं बोलते, अंग्रेजी नहीं बोलते, ये क्या है? So those are the spaces that have to be cleared. And that is where teachers, not training, I hate the word training, teachers are not monkeys. Their capacity building and education has to be focused on.
Fair enough.
Teacher training is very important. Thank you.
Okay, fair enough. But I think we've got another exponent of the language school, Abbas Rashid. Abbas, what would you like to say apart from the fact that we need language, whatever local language is? Quite frankly, I'm in the opposing camp. We don't need to worry about language. But Abbas. Abbas, unmute yourself. Go ahead.
Right. Go ahead. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thanks. No, I just want to very briefly endorse the idea of experiential learning and building on what the child brings from home, right? So the idea of pre-literacy learning. I think that point was very well made, and of course, again, endorsed by Neelam just now. But I think it's in that connection that one is suggesting that the mother tongue is important. And as far as I can tell, Nadeem, you are in a very small minority here. From what I've heard, from the participants and from the panel, that I think the importance of the mother tongue, of the first language of the child, that is part of what the child is carrying from home. It has to do with confidence. And I think, and I'd also like, the point that you and Shahid were making is, again, I think, as we all know, I have a different perspective on that. I think one can over-determine the impact and usefulness of technology. I think it's extremely useful as a supplement. I don't think we can displace the teacher. It's not enough to have tabs. I think it's not enough to have laptops. You do need someone mediating all that information. You need to help a child process that information into what is useful and meaningful knowledge eventually. And you do need other skills. You do need the skills of collaboration, of leadership. You do need a teacher to encourage a child, to make them confident. So those things can't be done by a tab or by a laptop. And of course, then that brings us back to how do you, and I think that's the point Neelam was making earlier about the need to have good teachers in those numbers. And that is a huge problem. Finland was mentioned. I just want to close there. What we have to remember is that teaching is one of the top 3 professions in Finland. That's the kind of premium they place on teaching. They don't give everybody cell phones and tabs. They make sure that the best and the brightest go into teaching. It is one of the top 3 professions. So, you may want to be somebody who wants to join the corporate world, become a doctor, or become a teacher. So it's that kind of the top level in terms of aspiration. And that's a whole different enterprise. Now we have to ask ourselves, how do we bring in all of those factors? Is it, culture? Is it what teachers are paid? Is it how they are trained? Is it how they're educated? So I think it is hugely complex, but there's no getting away from that. So I just want to make the point about the language and the continued need for having really good teachers. Technology alone will not do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Basa. But let me turn to Dr. Neelam Azaz Hussain. Dr. Hussain, please tell us. I still am not convinced that there is no need to change the education paradigm. We still need concrete schools. We still need classrooms. We still need students to come in and be taught what I or some adult thinks is important, negate their street smarts, negate their experience, life experience, and tell them that Wuthering Heights is more important than their life experience. How would you react to that?
May I come in on this? Sorry, Neelam. I mixed up the Neelams.
Yes,
Go ahead.
What I wanted to say was about the medium of instruction and learning in the mother tongue. I tend to endorse what Nadeem has said, and I'll tell you why. Linguistic research shows that between the ages of 3 and 6 is the language, if the child can acquire language. It's the age of the greatest language acquisition possible. So if you teach a 3 to 6 year old 3 languages, they can process the syntax cognitively in their head. So when you delay foreign languages, it becomes very difficult to learn them. Now, emotionally, I think our language is beautiful. I'm a Pakistani, I love Urdu. And I think the regional languages are beautiful too. But is Pakistan a first world country? Can it afford to disconnect from the developed world and from the global realities in the 21st century? If we are, then most certainly disconnect and be sentimental. I would not make a decision on that. But if you were to ask me, I have always taught students for the past 40 years to learn a foreign language well, because then it is too late. The brain begins to intercede. आप हम सब जो हैं, we are really products of the colonization and the British English we learned. It has been a huge advantage for me in research seminars, in education in the West. Knowing a second language and a global language is imperative. And why should class intercede on that? That's all I have to say.
Good. Can I have a minute?
May I come in on this?
Can I have 1 minute?
Okay, Abbas, go ahead.
Just 1 minute. No, I just want to clarify here that, Neelam, no one is for a second arguing that we don't need a second language. No one for a second is arguing that we should disconnect. Of course, we have to remain connected to the world, and it is imperative that we learn English. The only thing is the difference, Neelam, that you have to recognize between some of us and the many tens of millions who will never have the opportunity to learn English in the years that you want them to. So the idea is only that they should develop their cognitive abilities in the language that they're most familiar with, and of course go on to learn English. And I'm sorry, your research may be different than the one that I have gone through, so we can exchange notes there and our references. But I strongly differ with the idea that if you learn English as a second language, then you will not learn it at all. And I think we have the Chinese example, the Korean example, any number of European examples. I'm sorry, but I cannot accept that. Thank you.
Okay, maybe that's your opinion. But I do feel that research does indicate this, and a child can learn English as a subject earlier than later. Because early learning creates syntax structures in the brain.
I'm with you on that. Absolutely.
May I come in on that, please?
Please, go
Nadeem?
ahead. Go ahead.
I agree with Abbas, but I also agree with my namesake. And the early years are the years of extreme learning in terms of language acquisition skills. And मैंने research किताब में नहीं की. This is something we have tried out with our trilingual qaida at the public sector school level with the children of the Kachi class. We produce these illustrated books in 3 languages, English, Urdu, Punjabi, beginning with Punjabi, and the kids were orally speaking all 3 languages. They knew the words, they understood the concepts because the images were there to help them. And then they were narrativizing, they were talking about it. They were writing and acting out in little plays based on those 3 language acquisition. My point is, and I think Abbas's point is, that if you start the early years with the mother tongue, it builds the confidence, enhances cognitive growth, and paves the way to language acquisition in other languages. You can learn Russian, French, Korean, whatever you want after that, but आपकी बुनियाद पक्की होनी चाहिए, आपकी जड़ पक्की होनी चाहिए. अगर आपकी जड़ नहीं पक्की होगी, तो you will not have the confidence or maybe even the cognitive skills to move from one language to the other.
ठीक है जी. Fair enough. Although I would argue slightly differently, but we'll take
Nadeem Saab, can I make a small?
1 second. Can we take Dr. Kausar Abdullah Malik, a famous professor? Dr. Saab, please बताइए, or Professor Saab, I should say. Go ahead. Professor Saab, please. I think please speak in English. We've got some people who don't speak Urdu. Go ahead.
Ironic.
बोलिए.
What is ironic?
Professor Saab, go ahead.
I had only 2 small points. I'm not a professional educationist, but I was very intrigued to listen to all the comments and all remarks. I only want to know that the government is very aggressively pursuing uniformity in syllabus, you see, and Imran Khan is commonly saying that, there should be one syllabus all over the country, you see, And so how does that fit into all your ideas of diversity and all that, you see? And the second point I want to raise your attention to is there are about millions of students, children who are still out of school. What are we going to do about that, you see? Because all our emphasis is in the urban area education, you see, our major concern is for the rural areas, you see, where the school, even if the school is there, the quality education is not up to the mark, you see, So we have to concentrate on that, you see, and we have to educate the government. I think Shafqat Mahmood is going to come. We should ask him that what does he mean about the uniformity of syllabi, you see, and if they have something wrong once, you see, so it will be distributed all over the country, you see, so please have a very serious consideration on those counts, you see. Thank you.
Kausar Saab, that discussion will take place on Sunday with Shafqat, the single national curriculum. We'll certainly do that. On the outer school children, I'm an economist. I certainly believe that just as you and I have the right to own a car or own a shirt or own whatever, we make up our own minds what to buy. Obviously, people don't want our education, so that's their right. Why do we force them to come into school? But leave that as it may be. Zahra Aftab.
Dr. Saab, after Zara, can I just posit 3 questions? Thank you.
Sure, we will. Go ahead. Hanji, Zara. Zara, are you speaking
Yes,
or
now
should I
I
go
can.
ahead?
No. I'm here, and I have a few comments. I've been following this discussion, and देखा जाए तो हम सब तो privileged लोग हैं. हम सब के बच्चे. Oh, okay. So basically, what I'm trying to say is that we are all part of this elite whose kids study in these.
Speak for yourself, Zara. Speak for yourself, okay?
No, you included. You're a bigger elite than I am. I'm at least honest about it. So I just want to reinforce that the education that we are providing our kids reinforces inequality. It reinforces inequality through the medium of instruction. If you go out, and we don't have any parents here, any low-income parents. But if you survey these low-income parents, they want English medium education for their kids. And you talked about voting with our feet. So these parents send their kids to so-called English medium low-income private schools. That's why you see a mushroom growth of these schools. Now we need to figure out how to not only talk about the public sector, but how to make these private low-income schools effective. Is this trilingual curriculum a good idea, or should we just eliminate Urdu out of it and just stick to the vernacular and English? Because Urdu was part of a nation-building project, which I don't know how relevant it is. It's up to the panel to decide, but I think we need to call a spade a spade.
Great. Okay, thank you, Zara. Tahir Dinsa, very quickly. Tahir Dinsa, are you there?
Nadeem, one, Tahir is not talking, or after, please give me 4 questions.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely, I've got you in my mind.
Can you hear me?
Go ahead, Tahir, quickly.
Yeah. Actually, much of what I want to say has already been said by Dr. Neelam Hassan, but very quickly, I would share an experience. In medical terminology, you don't call this collarbone a collarbone, you call it clavicle. And the thigh bone is called femur. And when it comes to the, not anatomy, but physiology, there are verbs as well. And when you know all the verbs, you know the nomenclature, you become doctor. Learning any discipline is learning a language. So my point is that in first few years, only the languages and the arithmetic, which is also language, should be taught. And the personal experiences, my personal experiences, I have taught for many years in universities, production and journalism and all those things, not education. But when I was working with STPI, there was a chapter, Pakistan chapter, had to be written on reorienting education for sustainable development. And nobody was available to write that Pakistan chapter, and Springer was a good publisher. So I took the task, and just because of the language, which I learned during my primary school in convent school early, I could complete that research and write a chapter, and they just publish it. And I learned all the things related to the education. I interviewed Vakil Ahmed Khan for madrasas and all so many other things. And I remember I had a telephonic conversation with Dr. Shanaz Wazir Ali as well on that as well, to get few points of that. So I think the basic thing is that we should have very good education, 2, 3, 4 languages, your mother tongue, Urdu, English in the first few, and arithmetics. And that's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Amer Durrani, but please don't focus on the language issue. I think language issue we've beaten to death.
Oh, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Thanks, Nadeem. So I am just going to pose 3 or 4 questions. And I think that I just wanted to acknowledge Anaz, seeing you after a long time. Zulfikar, hi, how are you doing? Amreen, thank you very much to actually see you, meet you. 4 questions. So I think the core questions our first sort of session should answer is how to make education interesting. This is a question relating to children to school, right? The second one is who should provide it. I mean, should it be devolved really to the taluka or the UC? My current 5-year travels around Pakistan tell me that education should be a personal thing around the union councils, etc. But let me ask the third question. We should address the question, who should pay for it? Because that really matters how we turn education around. The fourth question is, should the madrasa model be replicated? I was just talking to Rajwana on WhatsApp, and he always sends me mangoes, and he loves poetry. We write to each other. So I think the important question we both agreed on
What,
is...
Rajwana? I didn't get mangoes this at all. Okay, go ahead.
Well, you have to be a poet, Nadeem. You haven't still started writing poetry. The last thing is the question around syllabus, and I hugely disagree with all the big minds, is that the syllabus is about a national narrative, a traditional narrative, or a religious narrative. So I just really want these questions to come into the discussion, because I think these are fundamental questions. Sometimes you have to look at the causality rather than at the symptoms. Thank you, Nadeem.
Okay, great. Okay, folks, anybody from the panel want to say anything, or should we leave it for tomorrow? Go ahead. Anybody wants to say anything, just tell me.
Can I say something?
Please, absolutely.
Thank you. I think that we've been talking a lot about, when you talk about should education be interesting, it's about the local context, like Neelam said. It's about the environment that the child lives in. That's what makes the education process for a child interesting. I really do believe in it, that you localize education as much as possible, in fact, in every way possible. ताकि जो वो बच्चा अपनी क्लास में जिस चीज़ के बारे में बात करता है वो अपनी एनवायरनमेंट में उसको देख सकता है, उसके साथ इंटरेक्ट कर सकता है, उसको समझ आती है, चाहे वो मौसम है, ज्योग्राफी है, पानी है, इश्यूज हैं, ताल्लुकात हैं, सोशल पैटर्न्स हैं, जो कुछ भी है. तो yes, make education interesting, make it relevant, make it close to it, to the student. The context matters. The context matters every time. That's one. Second question, who should finance education? Primarily, it is the function of the state. I really believe in it strongly. ये रियासत की जिम्मेदारी है कि उन तबकों के लिए खास तौर पर जो अपनी एजुकेशन का कॉस्ट बर्दाश्त नहीं कर सकते, क्योंकि जिस तरह इस वक्त हुकूमत के स्कूल चल रहे हैं उसमें एट्रिशन रेट है, ड्रॉप आउट है, उसमें वो तालीम नहीं दी जा रही, वो रेलेवेंस नहीं है, वो parents think the same and the child thinks the same, that it is of no great use going to a school which is basically a non-functional school. So finance it, but finance multiple models. Localize it, district education authority बनाएं, union councils को involve करें, parents को involve करें. ये बहुत ज़रूरी है. ये जो concept है ना कि government को खुद ही deliver करना है, ये अभी तक पाकिस्तान में कामयाब नहीं हुआ. बहुत सारे इदारे हैं लोकल लेवल पर जो कि डिलीवर कर सकते हैं. अभी पब्लिक प्राइवेट पार्टनरशिप्स आ रही हैं, बहुत सारी अरेंजमेंट्स इस वक्त पाकिस्तान में मौजूद हैं जहां पे आप देखते हैं कि schools are delivering in the local context for the low income groups more effectively than just public sector schools.
Okay, thank you very much, Anas. Thank you. Anybody else wants to say any last words, please? Go ahead. Kuratulan, Neelam, both the Neelams, anybody else, please? I don't want to include anybody. Otherwise, we'll carry it for tomorrow.
जी,
go ahead.
जी, can I say something? सबसे पहले तो बहुत शुक्रिया डॉक्टर साहब, बहुत शुक्रिया सबका. But I will once again say
नहीं अभी तो कल होना, अभी शुक्रिया ना कहें आपने, कल परसों में होना.
Sure. Experiential learning जो है मुझे वो बहुत ही ज़्यादा शनाज के भी कॉन्टेक्स्ट में ज़मीनी हक़ाइक़ से करीब लगती है, और वो ग्रेजुअल है और वो उसके ऊपर बिल्ड किया जा सकता है. और हमारा जो वादी है वो एक्सपीरियंशियल लर्निंग से ज़्यादा तेज़ी से अडेप्ट करेगी, और उसके अंदर आप आईटी और इंटरनेट और ये जो हमने बात की है वो सब हम ऐड कर सकते हैं. मैंने खुद देखा है कि जब शेपर्ड्स के साथ काम किया, हमारे फेलोज हैं शेपर्ड्स, तो वो जब उनको हमने ऑस्ट्रेलिया में शीप रेजिंग का हमने उनको दिखाया अपने इसके ऊपर मोबाइल पे, दे वर लाइक स्टक टू इट, और वो और मालूम करना चाहते थे, वो और चाहते थे उसको समझना. तो ये कनेक्शन जो मैंने कहा था, कोशिश की थी कहने की कि ये एक फर्द और यूनिवर्स के दरमियान, यूनिवर्स में मैं यहाँ ये बात क्लियर करना चाहती हूँ कि एक बच्चे का जो यूनिवर्स है वो उसका अपना घर है, उसकी जहाँ वो पैदा हुआ है रीच बढ़ता है, जब वो उसका स्कूल उसका यूनिवर्स होता है या उसकी लर्निंग स्पेस की यूनिवर्स ग्रो होता है, उसी कम्युनिटी उसकी यूनिवर्स होती है, और उसी तरह से उसका मुल्क, उसका डिस्ट्रिक्ट, उसका पूरा समाज, और फिर इस तरह से ग्लोबल रियलिटी उसकी यूनिवर्स बनती है। इसके लिए हमें बतदरीज एक लाइफ लॉन्ग लर्निंग, मगर उसका जो बेसिस हो वो एक्सपीरियंशियल हो। हमारा अभी जो समाज है पूरा, मैं मेजॉरिटी की बात कर रही हूँ, मैं थोड़े से अर्बन सेंटर्स की बात नहीं कर रही हूँ, उनको भी बहुत चाहिए है अपने अपने असल पाकिस्तान की रियलिटी से जुड़ना। जो अर्बन सेंटर्स में हमारे स्कूल्स हैं, एलिटिस्ट हैं, जो भी कुछ हैं, अच्छे स्कूल हैं, अच्छा काम कर रहे हैं, मगर वो कितना पाकिस्तान को, पाकिस्तान की रियलिटी को जानते हैं। ये बहुत बड़ी एक नॉलेज बेस है जो वो मिस कर रहे हैं, क्योंकि ये बच्चे जो इन स्कूलों में ये बहुत बड़ा कंट्रीब्यूट करेंगे आगे जाके, मगर बगैर पाकिस्तान और पाकिस्तान की रियलिटी को जाने हुए आप कैसे कंट्रीब्यूट करेंगे? तो ये जो गैप है इसको भी हमें देखना होगा, और इसको बहुत ही, और दोनों के दरमियान एक्सपीरियंशियल लर्निंग इज अ वेरी ब्यूटीफुल कॉन्सेप्ट, बहुत खूबसूरत है ये। और मैं बस ये थोड़ा सा क्लेरिफाई करना चाहती थी।
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you very much, folks. Thank you. I think we've had a great discussion. We leave it for tomorrow. Tomorrow we're going to discuss the role of the government in education, which is an important subject. There we'll talk about many things, including government schools, etc. Today, I think what we've learned about education, at least what I can see, I can sum it up in this way. We've had as many fund programs in the last 70 years as we've had education policies. So we are confused not only in macroeconomics, but also in education. We keep making policies, and quite frankly, we heard a lot of people who make these policies, but we are I'm still not very clear what we are trying to do in education. We made a lot of good noises about experiential, about critical analysis, about investigative education, about curiosity, about creativity, but our system does not entertain that at all. We've got a system that's very uniform. There is some diversity, but largely it's uniform. Largely it's school-based, largely it's teacher-based, largely it's concrete-based. And I think we really need to break out of this paradigm. The world is changing, and everybody's talked about the world changing, but I don't see a paradigm shifting, which is why we held this seminar, and we'll hold 4 more, and we'll inshallah come back to this theme, because I think we need to reopen this whole paradigm of education and try and get to a stable system of education rather than searching policy after policy after policy and not being able to come to a conclusion what education is. So that's where I'll leave it for the moment. I'll see you tomorrow. There's a lot of need to discuss what the role of the government is, what the government should be doing, because right now we've had a government-led system. Should it be a government-led system? 55% of the private sector has come in. But I'll have you know that we invited the TCF, we invited all those people, but unfortunately, people also don't want to participate in discussions. How do we have a system, education system, when the educated themselves don't want to debate and discuss? So I leave you with that thought. Thank you. All the best. It's all right to try and educate somebody else's child, but I'll also leave you with this thought, which my friend Jerry Rao in India asked once. Is your child studying in the same school that you are prescribing for others? Thank you. All the best, folks. See you tomorrow at 7, hopefully. Bye-bye.
Thank you.